Well, today we're going to talk about attacks on Christians. The Biden administration is silent on the issue, of course, because they are complicit, of course. They would rather talk about fake violence against trans people, something we've debunked on this show, by the way, since they won't talk about it, though we will. For hundreds of years, Christian churches have been off limits to war, an off limits zone from Europe to Latin America. I remember my Latin American history classes in college reading texts, how a family could rush into a church, seek sanctuary, while fascists tried to kill them. Even if they faced certain death from soldiers, the soldiers would stop at the front door of a church and spare their lives. In medieval Europe, a person could seek sanctuary in a church and remain safe and be cared for, actually. Truth. But that's no longer the case, and certainly not the case in Gaza, one of the holiest sites for Christians in the world. Christianity was, of course, born here, and it's where thousands of Christians live and worship. In fact, one of the oldest communities of Christians in the world lives in Gaza, dating back to the 1st century. Their plight has been ignored. Many of you, by the way, were very smart on this in our chat room. Many of you, at the very beginning of this, were asking, what about the Christians who live there? And many of you, in fact, who were talking about the Christians being attacked in that area. Would they be somehow protected, separated from Hamas? Would they be discriminately removed and not attacked? Many of you told us about your Christian family members who were trapped in Gaza, by the way. I recall one night where one impassioned viewer was telling us about her, I think it was her brother, was trapped there and trying to get out safely. You told us about church groups who were trying to get the messages out, and it seemed like it was falling on deaf ears. This weekend, we received the clearest sign yet that Christians have been deliberately targeted and killed by Israeli defense forces. This weekend, Israeli forces destroyed multiple neighborhoods with U.S. weapons. Look at this. Entire neighborhoods just carpet bombed and wiped away. Multiple well-known Christian sites attacked and destroyed. And European leaders, by the way, are silent, mostly. Up until this morning, Italy was silent, oddly. Like, why is Italy so silent? And then they finally came out today and announced this. In a rare show of criticism against Israel, Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani has slammed Israeli forces for shooting 2 women dead inside of a church in Gaza. An Israeli sniper shot 2 women inside a church. He said, this has nothing to do with the fight against Hamas because the terrorists are certainly not hiding in Christian churches, Tajani said. Spain is silent. Not a peep. Portugal's silent. Most of Europe is completely silent about it. President Biden, silent about it. White House, completely silent about it. Shh, don't talk about it. Can't talk about it. It's inconvenient to talk about it. A Catholic Pope, though, is not. Wonder what kind of pressure he's under to actually speak out about it. The Pope called it terrorism this weekend after Israeli snipers killed these Christians inside of a church. Listen to the Pope.
Continuo a ricevere da Gaza notizie molto gravi e dolorose. Civili inermi sono oggetto di bombardamenti e spari. E questo è avvenuto persino all'interno del complesso parrocchiale della Santa Famiglia, dove non ci sono terroristi, ma famiglie, bambini, persone malate con disabilità, suore. Una mamma e sua figlia, la signora Navda Khalil Anton e la figlia Samar Qamar Anton, sono state uccise e altre persone ferite dai tiratori scelti mentre andavano in bagno. È stata danneggiata la casa delle suore di Madre Teresa, colpito il loro generatore. Qualcuno dice è il terrorismo, è la guerra. Sì, è la guerra, è il terrorismo. Per questo la scrittura afferma che Dio fa cessare le guerre, rompe gli archi e spezza le lance. Preghiamo il Signore per la pace.
So the Pope comes out and condemns these terrorist attacks. He also, people are saying, well, did he condemn the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks, the horrific attacks by Hamas? And absolutely. So he did. He came right out very shortly after that and condemned the terrorism, but then also said, look, let's really make sure that civilians in this area, including Christian civilians, are not attacked. And can we do everything we can to make sure that they are protected? This weekend, a Christian mother and daughter were murdered by an IDF sniper. They were inside a church at the time, the Holy Family Parish in Gaza. One was killed as she tried to carry the other to safety, and 7 more people were shot by snipers and wounded as they tried to protect others inside the church. When they moved inside the church, Israeli snipers fired upon them, according to reports. Here are the 2 Christian ladies killed inside the church by these snipers. They look like Hamas, right? These are,
terrifying.
By the way, they are terrifying, right? Unbelievable. And these are not my words, by the way. The church released this statement, and I'll quote it directly. These are not my words. Around noon today, December 16th, a sniper of the IDF murdered 2 Christian women inside the Holy Family Parish in Gaza, where the majority of Christian families have taken refuge since the start of the war. Nahida and her daughter, Samar, were shot and killed as they walked into the Cisterns convent. One was killed as she tried to carry the other to safety. 7 more people were shot and wounded as they tried to protect others inside the church compound. No warning was given. No notification was provided. They were shot in cold blood inside the premises of the parish where there are no belligerents, meaning Hamas isn't hiding out there. And so that's end quote. Israel denies it, of course. Here's Israeli spokesman speaking on this and saying, there were no reports of a hit on the church, and no, this was probably Hamas doing this.
So I would reject the categorization of the words he used, cold-blooded killing. That would indicate a deliberate targeting of civilians. That's something we don't do. We don't shoot people who are going to church to pray. It just doesn't happen. That's not the way the IDF operates. That's against our rules of engagement. We don't know exactly what happened, and I would urge people not to jump to conclusions. There have been in the past all sorts of stories put out by Hamas and their supporters accusing Israel of all sorts of terrible deeds, and in the end they've proved to be wrong. And we're talking about a combat area. There's exchanges of fire between Israeli forces and the Hamas terrorists. To say that Israel is deliberately targeting Christian worshippers, that's a terrible accusation that is unfounded.
Would you acknowledge, Mr. Regev, that the bullets that killed these women were fired by the IDF?
I do not know that to be true. Obviously, we're looking into it. Could they have been killed by Palestinian terrorists who were shooting at our people indiscriminately? I don't know. But we've got to be very careful. There've been countless stories since this conflict began, where reports out of Gaza, people are 100% sure that Israel did something terrible or this, that, or the other. And in the end, it's been proven conclusively that that was not the case. And people have had to retract their words. Unfortunately, some have refused. But
okay, we know that the IDF targeted Shireen Abu Akleh before this began. Right. The Palestinian journalist who was just standing around, she was targeted by Israeli snipers. So for him to say Israel does not target innocents, that's false. We know that.
Well, yeah, almost 80 journalists have now been killed. I think the number stands today at 80.
Right, but at least in recent memory before this conflict, they can say, oh, the heat in the battle, people just get killed. We're trying really hard to be precise. It just doesn't happen because war is hell. Right. But for them to say it's our policy to not target civilians, that's just not true. That's just a lie. So that piece right there has very little credibility.
Well, we know this inside the hospitals, but this and specifically inside churches should be absolutely off limits. This should not be a news flash to them. But it is apparently to the United States and the Biden administration, although it shouldn't be, because the Biden administration's own State Department, I love going through State Department documents, because there's a treasure trove of hypocrisy. Because in the State Department's own assessments of Ukraine and other corrupt governments around the world, you'll find fascinating information where they account for these atrocities and what they're doing to target Christians. And it's right there in the State Department's own documents in the United States website. You can read it for yourself. And here's just a snapshot of the 2022 report on international religious freedom, Israel, West Bank, and Gaza. Biden's own State Department has cataloged the violence against Christians. In a State Department report from earlier this year, it detailed violence against Christians in the West Bank and Gaza by Israeli forces and Israeli extremists. Again, this is Biden's own State Department. This isn't us saying this. I'm going to quote it now for you. Here's the Biden State Department. The Christian heads of churches in Jerusalem continued to raise public concerns that the Christian presence and holy sites in Jerusalem were under threat. The statements identified pressure points on Christians that include violence and harassments against clergy and worshipers by Israeli extremists, vandalism, desecration of church property, attempts by settler organizations to obtain strategic property in and around the Christian quarter of the Old City and the Mount of Olives, and restrictions on residency permits for Palestinians as part of Israel's citizenship and entry law. This law remains an especially acute problem, according to church leaders, because of the small Christian population and consequent tendency to marry other Christians from the West Bank or elsewhere. The West Bank, where tens of thousands of Christians live, much greater in population than the thousands of Christians that live in Gaza. In April of this year, Israeli forces attacked Christian worshipers at the Sabbath of Lights ceremony in Jerusalem. Christians are worried they will go extinct, their words, in Gaza and the West Bank. Gaza Christians fear threat of extinction amid the Israeli war. Israel's assault on Gaza could spell the end of Christian communities' long history in the enclave, according to these reports. On October 19th, Israel bombed the church of the Saint Porphyrius, Gaza's oldest church, killing at least 18 people. The Israeli army said in a statement that the church was not the target of the attack. It was just, we missed, I guess. The Christian leaders didn't buy that story. In fact, one of the clergy said, the missile fell directly on it. We cannot believe that the church was not their aim, end quote. Evangelical Lutheran pastor and founder of Dar al-Khalimi University in Bethlehem says this community is under the threat of extinction. I'm not sure they will survive the Israeli bombing. Again, that's the evangelical Lutheran pastor. Go ahead, David.
Don't they say that they have the most advanced weapons that ever? Like they accidentally, whoops, that one must not have been as advanced as the others.
Well, it's interesting because today I was reading a report on and asking the question, why doesn't Israel use smart bombs? In fact, they're choosing instead to use what this report referred to as dumb bombs. It's interesting. Why would they choose to use dumb bombs instead of these smart ones? I'll leave that up to you at home to make your decisions about that. But Palestinian Christians have been calling on President Biden to push for a permanent ceasefire, telling the president, and they've been saying this repeatedly, church groups across the United States and in Palestine, West Bank and Gaza, calling on President Biden, calling for a ceasefire. Even though the White House is not mentioning Christians at all, there is hope, though. There is a sliver of hope that Israel's biggest supplier of weapons and funding, the United States, will ask them to scale back the killing. This report breaking just before the show. You have Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He is the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Israel. He's there now, and apparently he's going to be meeting with them tomorrow to convey a message of restraint, to scale back the killing. This according to reports. So the lesson, he said, is that you can win in urban warfare by protecting civilians. The lesson is that you can only win in urban warfare by protecting civilians. And of course, you remember Secretary Austin a few weeks ago said that you might win like a tactical battle, but you're going to lose the strategic war.
Yes. That
you're going to create a new, tens of thousands of new radicalized individuals who are going to want to rise up. Remember in the year 2003, actually, Israel declared and told the world that they had eliminated 98% of Hamas, that Hamas was 98% destroyed and contained in 2003. That's interesting. So if 98% of them were killed in 2003 or contained or imprisoned, then where did all of them come from in that amount of time? In 2003, that's just 20 years ago, according to my math, right? So that means then that if as you say, as the reports have, of course, pointed out, that they think there's no one innocent in Gaza at all, I guess, including Christians, right? So then where did all of these...
Well, we know a lot of them are quite young, right? A lot of the people who carried out the attacks are probably under 20. So that math would work out, but that would mean they were really fast procreators
They were a baby,
in these last 20 years. That means they all had to have been born right after they were 98% eliminated, right? So,
well, and that, if it was 2003, that gave them until 2006 to gain enough to gain power of Gaza, right? They became the...
Yeah, I guess so. The math doesn't add up. So
right.
I guess what my point is in saying that, according to this report from the Israelis, this came right out of the Israelis' mouth, by the way, that in 2003, 98% of Hamas was contained or imprisoned or destroyed. Okay, well then, how do you account for the 2.3 million that live there? Then are they all now Hamas? Okay. I guess the Christians are too. Let us know your thoughts on this in the comments below. We'll be awaiting the White House response on this. I'm sure the White House will be commenting on this and answering what these Christians are calling for, which is a permanent ceasefire. We'll see about that. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.